Welcome, Santa Clarita. This is your essential weekly connection to the most important news stories affecting our valley. On KQRU 107.9 FM, we go beyond the headlines to bring you the stories shaping our present and future. Get ready to be informed, inspired, and entertained. This is Santa Clarita Weekly. And now, here's your host, Sage Rafferty.
Welcome back for another edition of Santa Clarita Weekly. I'm Sage Rafferty. You can listen to the show on the radio at KQRU 107.9 FM on Thursday afternoons at 5:30 and on Saturday mornings at 9 o'clock. We're also on YouTube and Instagram, and you can find us online at santaclaritastar.com. So for those who didn't tune in last week, my co-host, Tim Haddock, passed away. So this is really the second episode without Tim. Of course, in the last episode we had his last interview, so go check that out. So just last week, Senator Padilla recounted a terrifying experience where he was roughed up and handcuffed by federal agents in Los Angeles. This wasn't some random street incident. It happened when he attempted to ask a question at a press conference being held by Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem. And we played that clip in our last episode, so go check that out. But Senator Padilla addressed the U.S. Senate this past Tuesday, detailing the shocking events. He made it clear that he wasn't trying to cause a scene. He was already in the building for another meeting, which had been delayed by Secretary Noem's press conference happening down the hall. He decided to listen in, and crucially, he says he was escorted into the press conference by a National Guardsman and an FBI agent who even opened the door for him, and they stood by him as he listened for a while. But when he finally attempted to ask a question he had been trying to get answers to from DHS for months regarding the militarization of Los Angeles, that's when things escalated dramatically. So here's Senator Padilla himself recounting the moment on the Senate floor.
For this body to know that over the last 2 weeks, in Los Angeles, my hometown, that we've seen masked federal agents in tactical gear ordered into our communities. We've seen a disturbing pattern of increasingly extreme and cruel immigration enforcement operations targeting non-violent people at places of worship, at schools, in courthouses, all to meet an arbitrary quota. Now we're seeing President Trump federalize National Guard troops and deploy them without the governor's consent. Active duty Marines now being deployed, escalating tensions in our city. And it's important to note all this without coordination with state and local law enforcement. And despite repeated requests for the justification for these extreme actions, and after months and months of little to no response from the administration on their aggressive and theatrical immigration raids, the Trump administration has done everything in their power but to provide transparency to the American people about their mission in Los Angeles. And so last week, I chose to go home to try to get answers from the administration as they are literally militarizing our city. And I want to share what I learned, I want to share what I heard, because it should shock the conscience of our country. Now, one of the first items on my schedule last Thursday was a meeting and a briefing with General Guillot, the four-star general in charge of U.S. Northern Command. Many of you know him. The briefing was scheduled at the federal building in West Los Angeles, where they're overseeing these military operations. Now, colleagues, when the United States military is deployed domestically, when our troops are deployed against the wishes of the governor for the first time since 1965, against the wishes of the local mayor, and even against the wishes of local law enforcement, both the police chief and the sheriff, we are in uncharted territory. So in my effort to do my duty to conduct congressional oversight and to try to get answers from the Department of Defense that state and local officials were not receiving, I went to the federal building in West Los Angeles. I was met at the entrance, by a National Guardsman and an FBI agent who escorted me through security screening and up to a conference room for my scheduled briefing. While waiting for my scheduled briefing with General Guillot, I learned that Homeland Security Secretary Noem was holding a press conference literally just down the hall. And that press conference was causing my briefing to be delayed. The thought occurred to me that, well, maybe I could attend this press conference and listen in. Just listen, in the hopes of hearing Secretary Noem provide some new information that could help us make sense of what was happening. I didn't just get up and go. I asked and was escorted by the National Guardsman and the FBI agent into the press conference. They opened the door for me. They accompanied me into the press briefing room. And they stood next to me as I stood there for a while, listening. And at one point, the United States Secretary of Homeland Security said that the purpose of federal law enforcement and the purpose of the United States military was to, quote, liberate Los Angeles from our governor and our mayor. To somehow liberate us from the very people that we democratically elected to lead our city and our state. Colleagues, let that fundamentally un-American mission statement sink in. That is not a mission focused on public safety. And that simply is not and cannot be the mission of federal law enforcement and the United States military. To my colleagues on both sides of the aisle, are we truly prepared to live in a country where the president can deploy the armed forces to decide which duly elected governors and mayors should be allowed to lead their constituents? Is that really the precedent that we're okay with setting? As Secretary Noem herself said last year when she was governor of North Dakota, at the time she said, quote, if Joe Biden federalizes the National Guard, that would be a direct attack on states' rights. That was Governor Noem, now Secretary Noem. Now, throughout this country's history, we've had conflict, we've had tumult, but we've never had a tyrant as a commander-in-chief. And that is not by coincidence. It's because the American people have always been willing to speak up and exercise their First Amendment right to protest, especially when our fundamental rights have been threatened. And as the proud son of immigrants from Mexico, it's that same right that I came to revere when marching through the streets with my family and my friends in 1994 in Los Angeles, protesting against the vile anti-immigrant rhetoric that was growing in California at that time. It was that year that a Republican governor was up for re-election and was down in the polls. And he turned to scapegoating immigrants to try to improve his political standing and his re-election chances. That fight is what inspired me to leave an engineering career behind and dedicate myself to trying to influence our government and our politics. So I've seen this before. California has seen this before. So last week, when I heard something so blatantly un-American from the Secretary of Homeland Security, a cabinet official. Of course, I was compelled, both as a senator and as an American, to speak up. But before I could even get out my question, I was physically and aggressively forced out of the room, even as I repeatedly announced I was a United States Senator and I had a question for the Secretary. And even as the National Guardsman and the FBI agent who served as my escorts and brought me into that press briefing room stood by, silently, knowing full well who I was. You've seen the video. I was pushed and pulled, struggled to maintain my balance. I was forced to the ground, first on my knees, and then flat on my chest. And as I was handcuffed and marched down a hallway, repeatedly asking, why am I being detained? Not once did they tell me why. I pray you never have a moment like this. But I will tell you, in that moment, a lot of questions came to my mind. First of all, where are they taking me? Because I know I'm not just being escorted out of the building. Am I being arrested here? And what will a city already on edge from being militarized think when they see their United States Senator being handcuffed just for trying to ask a question? And what will my wife think? What will our boys think? And I also remember asking myself, if this aggressive escalation is the result of someone speaking up against the abuses and overreach of the Trump administration, was it really worth it? But colleagues, how many Americans in our nation's history have marched, have protested, have shed blood, even lost their lives to protect our rights? How many Americans have served in wars overseas to protect our freedoms here at home? And how many Americans in the year 2025 see a vindictive president on a tour of retribution, unrestrained by the majority of this separate and co-equal branch of government, and wonder if it's worth it to stand up or to speak out? If a United States senator becomes too afraid to speak up, how can we expect any other American to do the same? And colleagues, you know me. I can't think of a person who would describe me as a flamethrower. I try to be respectful. I try to be considerate to every member of this body, regardless of our political differences. And so I do want to take a moment to thank all of my colleagues on both sides of the aisle who have reached out to share your messages of support, whether they were public messages or many in private. Trust me, they mean the world to me, and I know they mean the world to my family. But if you watched what unfolded last week and thought what happened is just about one politician and one press conference, you're missing the point. If that is what the administration is willing to do to a United States senator for having the authority to simply ask a question, imagine what they'll do to any American who dares to speak up. If what you saw happen can happen when the cameras are on, imagine not only what can happen, but what is happening in so many places where there are no cameras. Colleagues, this isn't about me. In fact, it's not just about immigrant communities or even just the state of California. It's about every single American who values their constitutional rights. It's about anyone who's ever exercised their First Amendment rights, or anyone who's ever disagreed with a president, or anyone who simply values our democracy and wants to keep it. Now, the president will tell you that this is just about undocumented immigrants, about law and order, and about targeting dangerous, violent criminals. If it was just about targeting dangerous, violent criminals, there would be no disagreement, there would be no debate. But we know differently. We don't think, we know differently. Public data released by the administration shows that the majority of immigrants currently in ICE custody have no prior criminal conviction. And new reporting shows that less than 10% of immigrants taken into ICE custody since October have no serious criminal convictions. Less than 10%. But a couple weeks ago, it seemed that Donald Trump was at the lowest point of his presidency so far. He was drowning in a week of terrible headlines. The American people were finally waking up to the realities of the budget reconciliation bill that will cut health care, nutrition assistance, and good-paying, clean energy jobs while reducing the tax burden on billionaires. He was losing his tariff wars as the costs for everyday goods were continuing to rise. His promises to end Russia's invasion of Ukraine were falling flat, and he'd been handed loss after loss in federal court. He even had a very public breakup with Elon Musk. And I mention this only because we know what happens when the headlines turn on Donald Trump. When Donald Trump is having a bad week, he turns to the same tired playbook he always has. When in doubt, scapegoat immigrants and manufacture a crisis to distract the media from what's going on. That's the reason ICE raids ramped up in California. And when Californians took to the streets to peacefully protest, he bypassed the governor and federalized the National Guard. And even with their presence over a couple of days, as things began to settle, he escalated even further by sending in the Marines. He wants the spectacle, not just to distract, but to justify his undemocratic crackdowns and his authoritarian power grabs. That's the reason why, even though the vast majority of protests have remained peaceful, what a weekend. That notwithstanding, the president, the vice president, and their allies have continued to call all the protesters out there insurrectionists. Yes, this is the same man who provoked an actual insurrection at our Capitol on January 6th. The same man who incited a violent mob carrying Confederate flags against Congress. The same man who then pardoned the convicted felons who assaulted our brave Capitol police officers. Donald Trump is continuing to test the boundaries of his power, and he's surrounded himself with yes men and underqualified attack dogs, from the DHS secretary to the FBI director to the Secretary of Defense, who will rubber stamp every anti-democratic step he takes. This administration's officials, and maybe not all, but many Republicans in Congress may choose not to do their job, but they cannot stop me from doing mine. And I refuse to let immigrants be political pawns on his path towards fascism. Again, if you really think this is just about immigrants and immigration, it's time to wake up. What's happening is not just a threat to California, it's a threat to everyone in every state. If Donald Trump can bypass the governor and activate the National Guard to put down protests on immigrant rights, he can do it to suppress your rights too. If he can deploy the Marines to Los Angeles without justification, he can deploy them to your state too. And if he can ignore due process, strip away First Amendment rights, and disappear people to foreign prisons without their day in court, he can do it to you too. Because California is just a test case for the rest of the country. Last week, for many, was a warning shot, but I pray that it also serves as a wake-up call. We've now seen, since Thursday, Trump threaten to do the same in other cities run by elected Democrats. He's saying the quiet part out loud. It doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat or an independent. We all have a responsibility to speak up and to push back before it's too late. So I do encourage people to keep peacefully protesting. There's nothing more patriotic than to peacefully protest for your rights. Because no one's going to liberate Los Angeles but Angelenos. No one will redeem America but Americans. No one is coming to save us but us. And we know that the cameras are not on in every corner of the country. But if this administration is this afraid of just one senator with a question, colleagues, imagine what the voices of tens of millions of Americans peacefully protesting can do. I thank you all for being here to hear me, and I thank you, Mr. President.
So physically and aggressively forced out of the room, even as I repeatedly announced I was a U.S. Senator. So that's a very powerful, deeply troubling words from Senator Padilla. He described being face down on the ground in handcuffs, fearing not just for himself, but for how an already inflamed city might react to seeing a televised assault like that and worrying about his family. And Padilla concluded his remarks with a powerful message, seeing this incident as a direct tactic from the Trump administration to distract from what he called a week of terrible headlines, including rising deficits, trade war losses, and legal defeats. And he believes this was a manufactured crisis designed to show power and scapegoat immigrants. But more importantly, Senator Padilla called on everyone, especially politicians, to speak up. He posed a vital question to his colleagues. If a United States senator becomes too afraid to speak up, how can we expect any other American to do the same? And he called last week's events a warning shot and a wake-up call. So he urged continuous peaceful protests, emphasizing its patriotic nature and stating, "No one's going to liberate Los Angeles but Angelenos. No one will redeem America but Americans. No one is coming to save us but us." A truly inspiring and defiant message in the face of what he experienced. So the incident and Senator Padilla's stronger response, underscore that critical importance of free speech, the right to question authority, the fundamental checks and balances of our government. And it's a story that resonates deeply, not just in Washington, D.C., but right here in Santa Clarita and across California. And of course, one other addition to this story is Vice President Vance landed in Los Angeles, and he, at a press conference, called Senator Alex Padilla Jose Padilla. So that's something that people were deeply offended by, because he is, Alex Padilla and J.D. Vance served in the Senate together. But we'll continue to follow any developments on this. And coming up next, we've got some updates on local sports, and then we'll look at what's happening. All right, so let's talk about sports. The Los Angeles Dodgers, which is everybody's favorite baseball team, but the moment everybody in Los Angeles has been waiting for finally arrived Monday night. Shohei Ohtani, the Dodgers superstar, made his highly anticipated return to the pitching mound nearly 22 months after his last major league start and following a second major elbow surgery. Ohtani took to the mound for the first time in a Dodgers uniform in their 6-3 win over the Padres. It was an electric atmosphere in Dodger Stadium, packed with fans, many sporting those iconic number 17 jerseys. Ohtani received a thunderous ovation as he warmed up and then jogged out to the mound. Manager Dave Roberts even admitted he was fanboying a little, and Ohtani himself confessed to feeling some nerves. But despite the long layoff, Ohtani showed flashes of his incredible power, touching 100.2 miles per hour with his fastball. He threw one inning, allowing just one run, impressing with his velocity. After leaving the mound, he immediately headed to the plate, going 2 for 4 with 2 RBIs, including a game-tying double. The performance also officially puts him atop the Dodgers franchise list for most career homers by a player with at least one start on the mound, with 79 homers. But this multifaceted performance, batting, leadoff, and starting on the mound, places Ohtani in an incredibly exclusive club, with only 3 other players having done so since 1900. Ohtani aims to pitch once a week, hoping to gradually extend his outings and contribute fully as the unicorn two-way player he is. It was a truly monumental night for the Dodgers and a testament to Ohtani's dedication and recovery. We'll be watching closely to see how he continues to make history this season. But that's all we have for today, so tune in next week for more discussions about the news from Santa Clarita. You can listen to the show on the radio at KQRU 107.9 FM at 5:30 on Thursday evenings and 9 on Saturday mornings. You can also watch us on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram, and listen to us on SantaClaritaStar.com or wherever you listen to podcasts. So leave us a comment and be sure to subscribe to Santa Clarita Weekly Online. Thanks for listening and have a great week.
Thank you for listening to Santa Clarita Weekly. You can watch the show on Santa Clarita Star's YouTube channel and Facebook page, as well as listen in on the radio at KQRU 107.9. Visit SantaClaritaStar.com for more content and tune in right here to KQRU 107.9. A new voice for Santa Clarita.